In my previous video, I presented the Kalam-Cosmological argument for God's existence. There I examined the reasons for believing that everything that begins to exist has a cause, and gave 4 independent reasons for believing the universe began to exist. I also examined several attributes that we could reasonably believe that the cause of the universe possessed. Now it is time to answer objections to the argument. Since the Kalam-Cosmological argument is currently one of the most popular arguments for God's existence, it is not surprising that it faces numerous objections to all 3 points. This video is not intended to exhaustively examine each and every objection. Rather, I intend to examine and refute several of the strongest or most common objections. I'll begin by considering objections to premise 1, then move on to objections to premise 2, and finally objections to the conclusion. The first objection is the rather odd claim that nothing ever begins to exist, but rather everything is composed of pre-existing matter. Those who embrace this objection are committed to mereological nihilism, the view that matter is eternal and that everything we see is just different arrangements of it. Dr. William Lane Craig explains the absurdity of such a position. He says, "Did I exist before I was conceived? If so, where was I? What was I doing during the Jurassic period? Has the World Trade Center always existed? How come the Native Americans never noticed it?" This idea would commit us to the view that even we ourselves don't really exist, but are just interesting arrangements of matter. If one has to deny their own existence, which is one of the few things we can know with certainty, then it would seem their view is irrational. Yet even if we accepted such an absurd notion, different arrangements of matter that have always existed in their current form still seem to need a cause to explain why they hold the shape that they do. And as pointed out in my last video, the idea of an eternal past is absurd. The second objection is based on the B theory of time. Before addressing this objection, it is necessary to give a brief description of the A and the B theory of time. According to the A theory of time, time actually passes from moment to moment as we perceive it. Time is tensed. However, on the B theory, time is actually one totality of indexed moments. Time is tenseless. Past, present, and future all exist equally. Moments in time don't actually pass any more than the inches on a ruler do. Thus, if the B theory is correct, it doesn't seem to make sense to speak of things beginning to exist. According to William Lane Craig and James Sinclair, the Kalam argument is entirely dependent on the A theory of time. They say, from start to finish, the Kalam-Cosmological argument is predicated upon the A theory of time. On a B theory of time, the universe does not in fact come into being or become actual at the Big Bang. It just exists tenselessly as a 4-dimensional space-time block that is finitely extended in the earlier than direction. Because of this belief, Craig has written multiple books in defense of the A theory. However, rather than delve into the arguments for and against the A theory and the B theory, I want to challenge the idea that one must accept the A theory in order to accept the Kalam argument. This is not necessarily true. In a recent paper, Curtis J. Metcalfe argues that the Kalam can be made compatible with the B theory. He writes, "My project is important because on the version Craig advances, it seems the argument is only as strong as the arguments one can give for the A theory. Therefore, if one is not persuaded by a tensed view of time, one has immediate grounds for rejecting an argument that might otherwise be compelling. This seems to sell the argument short." Metcalfe argues that even if the B theory of time is correct, the number of indexed moments in time must still be finite. As we saw in our last video, actual infinities cannot exist. Thus, the number of moments in a B series cannot be infinite, and therefore must have had a beginning. Metcalfe argues as follows. If there is no beginning to the B series, then an actual infinity exists. An actual infinity does not exist. Therefore, it is false that there is no beginning to the B series. Therefore, there is a beginning to the B series. So the B theory objection doesn't escape that everything that begins to exist has a cause. Some atheists, such as Lawrence Krauss, have argued that the apparently spontaneous creation of virtual particles on the quantum level refutes the notion that whatever begins to exist has a cause. In a quantum vacuum, virtual particles come into existence for a brief nanosecond and then go out of existence. Does this refute the first premise? First of all, these virtual particles do not come into being without a cause. A quantum vacuum is a sea of fluctuating energy, and these fluctuations are the cause of the particle's existence. Furthermore, the larger the particle, the shorter its existence. Hugh Ross explains,
yes, you can get virtual particles pop into existence of the quantum space-time foam of the universe, but they have to go back to the quantum space-time foam before the human observer can detect it. We call them virtual particles. And what Lawrence Krauss is saying, well, if we can do that with a virtual particle, why not the whole universe? But the greater the mass you try to bring into existence from the quantum space-time foam, the faster it must return. And the return time for something as big as the observable universe is 10 to the minus 120 seconds. And no matter how we interpret the days of creation, we all agree the universe is older than 10 to the minus 120 seconds.
Well, I couldn't have said it better myself.
Thus, the existence of virtual particles in a quantum vacuum does nothing to undermine the first premise. Although a strong defender of the universe having had a beginning, the eminent agnostic cosmologist Alexander Vilenkin has formulated an objection to the first premise. Vilenkin says that nothing could stop the universe from coming into existence. He says that anything that is not forbidden will eventually happen with some probability given the laws of conservation in quantum mechanics.
There is no conservation law that forbids creation of a closed universe out of nothing. And in quantum mechanics, anything that is not forbidden by conservation laws necessarily happens with some probability. So quantum mechanics allows a spontaneous nucleation, you could say, of a closed universe out of nothing.
The first problem is that Vilenkin assumes the laws of physics existed prior to the universe. However, there is no real reason to believe this is true. If there was no universe, why would we believe that the laws which govern it would exist when it did not? Second, Dr. Craig points out that if nothing existed to stop the universe from coming into existence, then it is equally true that nothing existed to permit the universe coming into existence. Theists can simply turn Vilenkin's reasoning around on him here and argue that because nothing existed to prevent God coming into existence, he therefore did. Finally, just because everything could happen with some probability, it doesn't follow that everything will. Could, for example, two contradictory things both happen? Of course not. This would violate the law of non-contradiction. Therefore, Vilenkin's objection does not work. We turn now to objections to the second premise. Some objectors will ask about other proposed models of the universe besides the Big Bang model. An example would be a universe that expands and contracts eternally. However, there is no evidence for this. We have only ever observed our universe to be expanding. Furthermore, even a universe that expands and contracts couldn't go on doing so eternally. Such a universe would run out of energy due to the second law of thermodynamics. Many other models have been proposed, such as eternal inflation models, contracting universe models, and cyclic models. Besides being contrived and lacking any evidence, none of these have been able to avoid an absolute beginning. And again, any eternal model of the universe still has the problem of the impossibility of actual infinities. Andrew Loke notes, the question of ultimate origins is related to whether an infinite temporal regress is possible. Alex O'Connor makes the objection that perhaps the universe didn't come into existence from nothing. Perhaps more physical nature is all that exists beyond our universe.
Because the Big Bang has never claimed to be the beginning of everything. Rather, it's only ever claimed to be the beginning of everything that we know of. Perhaps there were universes before ours. Perhaps the death of one universe is the Big Bang of the next, and this could be some kind of infinite chain. Perhaps there's a multiverse, and not even a multiverse of separate entities, but maybe one large, infinitely large fabric in which there are sort of localized areas of activity, one of which is our observable universe, which did have its own beginning. There's simply no way for us to know.
There is absolutely no basis for this objection. To posit more nature beyond our universe is to simply imagine things into existence. Even if there was more nature beyond our universe, that doesn't escape that our universe had a beginning or that it needs a cause. Even things that begin to exist within nature require causes due to the principle of sufficient reason. Furthermore, the hypothetical nature beyond the universe still cannot be eternal, since this nature would still require an actual infinity of moments, and as I've previously shown, that is not possible. Therefore, positing a nature beyond our universe still doesn't escape the necessity of an absolute beginning. Alex O'Connor objects that the Kalam argument commits the fallacy of composition.
But we shouldn't be so naive to assume that everything that applies to things within the universe also applies to the universe itself. To do so is to commit the fallacy of composition, and this is one of Bertrand Russell's prime objections to the KalamCosmological argument.
Basically, the fallacy of composition is when you say that because something is true of every part of a thing, it is therefore true of the thing as a whole. An example would be a pile of pebbles. Just because each individual pebble is light, it doesn't follow that the entire pile is light. Dr. Craig says that this is simply a straw man of the argument. He says, "Now I have never argued that because every part of the universe has a cause, therefore the whole universe has a cause. Rather, I have offered reasons for thinking, 1. Something cannot come from nothing. 2. If something can come into being from nothing, it becomes inexplicable why just anything and everything doesn't come into being from nothing. 3. Common experience and scientific evidence support the truth of premise 1. Note well that the third reason is an appeal to inductive reasoning, not reasoning from composition. It's drawing an inductive inference about all members of a class or thing based on a sample of the class. In other words, the Kalam is not saying that because every part of the universe began to exist, therefore the universe began to exist. Rather, the argument is just saying that everything that begins to exist has a cause. This is what our experience constantly shows to be true. Finally, let us turn to objections to the conclusion. Atheists such as Stephen Woodford object that the Kalam doesn't even mention God.
The first point to be raised, in my opinion, is that even if we accept the KalamCosmological argument in its entirety, all it would prove is that there was a cause of the universe, and that's it. It doesn't even suggest, let alone prove, that this cause was a being. Hence, even if accepted, the argument doesn't remotely support theism.
But there's a world of difference between proving the existence of some kind of arbitrary first mover and proving the existence of a god, and especially your particular god.
This objection is simply disingenuous. True, the basic syllogism doesn't mention God. However, no one stops with the syllogism. As I pointed out in my last video, there is much we can infer about the cause. If atheists object to calling an eternal, spaceless, immaterial, powerful, personal, and intelligent cause God, then I can just claim to be an atheist who believes in an eternal, spaceless, immaterial, powerful, personal, and intelligent cause of the universe. However, that would be a very strange sort of atheism, which is not befitting of the name. Furthermore, no single theistic argument proves God. The case for theism is cumulative, which means it is based on several arguments, all of which evidence different aspects of God. And besides, if there really are no theistic implications from the Kalam, why have atheists spent so much time trying to debunk it? Atheists also protest that the Kalam doesn't prove the Christian God.
Even if the KalamCosmological argument was sound, which I hope to prove to you that it's not, it still wouldn't prove any particular god.
This objection fails to take the Kalam argument seriously. Theism isn't proven by one single argument, and neither is Christianity. However, theism must be true before Christianity can be true. Theism is a necessary, but not a sufficient condition for the truth of Christianity. So while this objection is technically true, the Kalam doesn't purport to prove Christianity. It only serves to prove generic theism, which in turn opens the possibility that Christianity is true. Atheists who make this objection also seem to miss the point that even though the Kalam doesn't prove which version of theism is true, it does prove that atheism is false. Therefore, hiding behind this objection does nothing to salvage their own worldview. Still more atheists ask, why should we conclude that there is only one God and not many?
And for that matter, who's to say that it would be one god? Why not some kind of polytheistic council?
This objection is irrelevant because regardless of whether the Kalam proves monotheism or polytheism, it disproves atheism. However, to respond to this objection directly, we may simply appeal to the philosophical principle known as Occam's razor. According to this principle, we should not multiply explanations beyond what is necessary to account for a given effect. To illustrate, suppose that you leave a stack of 100 $1 bills on your dresser. When you return, you discover that the stack is gone. Is it more reasonable to posit that one burglar stole the entire stack, or that 100 burglars each stole $1? Clearly, the better explanation is that one burglar stole the entire stack unless we have some evidence to suggest that there was more than one. Likewise, when discussing the origin of the universe, it is more reasonable to attribute the universe to one God rather than many. Postulating many gods is simply unnecessary. In summary, although there are manifold objections to this argument, they all have serious flaws. These flaws invalidate them and as such leave the argument untouched. Therefore, the KalamCosmological argument is a solid basis for believing that God exists.